Welcome to Game Changers. I'm Noam Weissman here at Unpacked, the head of education. And today we have with us Yossi Klein HaLevi. Yossi, welcome.
Well, thanks, Noam.
We are so excited to have you on our show.
Great to be with you.
Thank you so much. Yossi is you've accomplished so much in your life. You're the senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. You're the co-founder of the Muslim Leadership Initiative, and you're the author of books such as Memoirs of a Jewish Extremist, Like Dreamers, and Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor. And they're books that are New York Times bestsellers. So we're so excited to have you to have an exciting conversation with us.
Looking forward.
I also want to thank all of our partners for helping make this series possible, making the series Game Changers possible. And we are excited to go forward and go right into our interview, to our questions with Yossi. Yossi, tell us about the path that got you to where you are today.
So I grew up with an intense awareness of living in one of the most extraordinary times in Jewish history. I was born into a Holocaust survivor family, and so was acutely aware of living after the Holocaust, after the creation of the State of Israel. And I knew that I was living in a moment that imposed on me certain responsibilities. And I always felt the privilege of being a Jew at the time when really we were rethinking some of the most basic elements of what does it mean to be a Jew. And so the question that I always struggled with is, how do I live as a Jew in this world at this time? What does it mean to be a Jew after the Holocaust, after the creation of Israel? At the same time, I was aware of living in the most extraordinary time in human history. Time when for the first time, humanity had the capability of destroying itself, which means that we knew that the human story could, God forbid, come to an end. And that imposed a sense of sober responsibility on me as well. So growing up with these two awarenesses, on the one hand, the sense of the apocalyptic, the Holocaust, living in a nuclear world. On the other hand, the sense of a redemptive possibility, creation of the State of Israel, the end of Jews living in exile, the transformation of exile into diaspora. There is no diaspora. There's no exile anymore. Jews don't live in enforced separation from the land of Israel. And so being part of the first generation in 2,000 years that wasn't living in a state of exile, these were the issues that I think I was born into. And I think I got them almost by osmosis from my father.
So Yossi, you're talking about your journey. One of the earlier books in your journey is a book that I have in front of me called Memoirs of a Jewish Extremist. Incredible, powerful book. You describe yourself as an extremist, or the title of your book is Memoirs of a Jewish Extremist. Interestingly, it's not former extremist. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the word extremist. What do you mean by the word extremist? Doesn't it just depend on where you sit? Who's to say what defines one person as an extremist? Maybe people use the word extremist as a freedom fighter, as something else. But is the word extremist a pejorative word? Talk to us about that word.
Well, Noam, I would say that there's the easy definition of extremist and more complicated. The easy definition is an extremist is someone who uses extreme tactics, who believes that the ends justify the means. And certainly when I was growing up, I was in the defense league. I believed that any means were legitimate if it would further Jewish people. But I think that there's a deeper layer there, and that is that there's an extremist temperament. Extremist temperament despises nuance, regards anything but an absolutist, one-dimensional certainty as a kind of a betrayal, as a waffling, being soft. And I despised waffling when I was young. I wanted absolute truth. Now I still crave absolute truth, I would say that the search for absolute truth defines my life in a religious sense, in a spiritual sense, not in a political sense. I'm no longer looking for absolute truth in politics. And I think that people get into trouble when they confuse the search for absolute truth, which really does belong in religion, with politics, which needs to be realistic, practical. Politics is dealing with the world as it is, not with the world that we imagine it should be. And so you try to deal with the world as it is and move it a little bit further in a positive direction. But that's the difference between, let's say, a revolutionary temperament and an evolutionary temperament.
So, talking about your evolution, after you wrote memoirs, one of the books that I've really learned a lot from is Like Dreamers, this book right here. So let's talk about Like Dreamers for a moment. How did you decide to write Like Dreamers? Could you talk to us about the young people want to know about the process of writing a book? Do you ever get writer's block? How do you, so like, how did you write Like Dreamers? Why did you write Like Dreamers? And I'll ask a tougher question. Since 1967, do you see a serious difference in terms of Israeli mentality, or how have things shifted since 1967 from before 1967?
Lots of questions. I'm
Yes.
glad that we have 4 hours for this interview.
No, we have 3 minutes for that question.
Just for those questions.
Yeah.
So, Like Dreamers, I'll just say a word about what it's about, and maybe in that way try to answer your question. Like Dreamers is the story of 7 Israeli paratroopers who fought in Jerusalem in 1967. One part of this group became leaders of the settlement movement. Another part became leaders of the peace movement, anti-settlement movement. And they were friends, comrades in arms. And I wanted to tell the story of Israel through these entwined lives. And so the book begins in the Six-Day War. It tells that story, but it's really the story of the subsequent 50 years. What happened to Israel as a result of the Six-Day War? Mm-hmm. And it is an exploration of the schism in the Israeli soul, and increasingly, I would say, in the soul of the Jewish people, between those who believe that we can't make any compromise on the land, and those who believe that to hold all of the land would destroy Israel as a Jewish and democratic country. And so this was the book that I set out to write because I wanted to tell a complicated story about Israel, and a story that reflected my own internal Israeliness, because I am divided exactly between those two positions. There's a part of me that is left-wing, that believes that retaining Judea and Samaria would destroy Israel. And there's a part of me that's right-wing, which believes this is ours. Of course it's ours. And to create a Palestinian state in that territory could endanger the security, the existence. So I wanted to tell the story of that rift, which is it's my internal Israeli story, and to some extent, it's all of our story. And I felt that telling that story through these lives was a way of personalizing it, was a way of taking it out of the known political and well-trod arguments, and instead bringing it into the lives that have been shaped by this debate, by this dilemma. So what brought me to write that book was the need to tell a complicated story about Israel that would make space for both left and right. The way that I tell the book is actually the purpose of the book. The book goes in and out of left-wing and right-wing states of consciousness. When I'm writing about a left-wing character, the book becomes left-wing. When I'm writing about a right-wing character, the book becomes right-wing. And the purpose of that is to help the reader enter into these very different states of consciousness and try to create a sense of empathy with the camp that you may oppose.
So Yossi, that sounds like a very challenging thing to do. And I want to pick up on a couple things that you said in your answer there. One of them is that you said that, of course, the land is ours. That's like the right side of you speaking. I wonder if you would be willing, when you work in you're a co-founder of the Muslim Leadership Initiative. Are you willing, when you're speaking to Muslim leaders, are you willing to say sentences like, of course the land is ours?
Everything that I've just said to you now, I have said to Muslims, Muslim American leaders. I say to my Palestinian interlocutors when I meet with Palestinian groups. Of course, that's what I say. But I also say that just as I believe that all of this land between the river and the sea belongs to me, I understand that there's another people sitting in this land and that they believe that all the land belongs to them. And for that reason, I come to the very painful conclusion that neither side has an alternative but to partition this land. And it's not only partitioning the land, it's partitioning our deep sense of justice. Because, like Palestinians, my sense of justice for my people is that this land all belongs to me. Of course it does. And when I think about giving up Judea and Samaria, it's traumatic for me. And I never use the language of giving back. Mm. And I never use the language of occupied territory. For me, it's not occupied. I am occupying another people that's living there. But I, as a Jew, am not an occupier in Judea. I am willing to give up what belongs to me by right. And I expect Palestinians to give up what they believe belongs to them by right, which is what we call Judaism.
Right. So, I mean, what you're saying right there sounds to me like an incredibly nuanced position, something that you despised, as you said, or were at least uncomfortable with in your younger years. Could you talk to us about the following quote? It's not from you, but it is from Aristotle, and it sounds to me like the type of quote that you live by. Aristotle says the following: the mark of an educated mind is to be able to entertain ideas without necessarily accepting them. How do you think that young people could do that? Why do you think that that's a value? Why is that something that you seem to be encouraging? Why is it important?
One of the things that I learned when I came to Israel, and I moved here in 1982, the beginning of the First Lebanon War, right when the left-right schism was actually taking off, literally that summer, when war no longer united us, but divided us. And so I had to start dealing immediately with having moved into a society that was tearing itself apart. And the way that I decided to try to navigate that was to listen carefully to left and right. And, human beings have two sides to their brains. We have a right side and we have a left side. And the reason I think we have that is to help us navigate complexity. And my understanding of this moment in Jewish history, and by extension of human history, that we are living at a time where simplistic answers, whether they're simplistic political answers or simplistic religious answers, may be satisfying, but they're not going to help us get through. And within a Jewish context, the more each side barricades itself into its own certainties, the more we are, God forbid, setting the stage for the disintegration of the Jewish people. And so I see the literal survival of the Jewish people, our ability to maintain minimal intactness, as being dependent on our developing the capacity for what we can call multidimensional thinking, so that we're able to hold in our heads more than one idea at the same time, even if those ideas contradict each other. And so I go to the Palestinian issue as a classic example. When I moved to Israel in the early 80s, I started listening to the arguments of left and right. The left would say, how could we maintain a Jewish and democratic state by forcibly including millions of Palestinians? I heard that. I said, sounds right to me. Then I would hear the right say, how can we make peace with a Palestinian national movement that doesn't accept our most basic legitimacy, our indigenousness here? And I said, sounds right to me. And I realized that I was actually becoming a centrist, because
Okay,
a
so Yossi,
centrist
I want to ask
centrist
you.
is that ground that can
Yeah.
hold the left and the right.
Okay, so I'm one of the leaders that I've looked up to in the 19th century is a Hasidic Rebbe by the name, or he goes by the Kutzker Rebbe. That's what people called him, and he would always said, Yossi, that the center of the road is only meant for horses. And I'm obviously not calling you a horse right now, but there are people who would argue that being a centrist is not really holding any position. It's just saying I'm not right and I'm not left. So what do
Yes.
you say back to that? What is it? What does it mean to be a centrist?
Well, I'll leave the Kutzker out of this.
Okay.
And I would say that, again, if we're taking the Palestinian issue as a template for what a centrist position would be, it would be a combination of several positions. First of all, in principle, the land belongs to me, right wing. In practice, I recognize there's another people there, a competing claim, and I need to come to terms with that, left wing. In principle, I believe that we must create a Palestinian state, save Israel as a Jewish and democratic society, left wing. In practice, I believe that if we were to create a Palestinian state anytime soon, in the current circumstances of the Middle East, it would endanger Israel's security to the point where we may not be able to defend ourselves. And so we cannot create a Palestinian state anytime soon, right wing. Now, on some issues, that makes me left wing, and some it makes me right wing. For me, it's a very coherent position. It
Right.
means that I must keep my long-term option for a two-state solution open. And it also means I can't be a fool about blindly jumping into danger and pretending that somehow it's all going to work out. I have only one Jewish state. I have one shot at the renaissance of the Jewish people in our land, and I'm going to protect that fiercely. But protecting the Jewish people in its land means several things. It means protecting us physically. It also means protecting us morally. It means not turning the Jewish people into a permanent occupier of another people. And again, I use the O word, the
Yeah.
occupier word,
So you're not using
very
the
deliberately.
you're not using the O word in quotes.
No,
I,
no, no.
why
We
not?
are occupying another people. It is a
Right.
tragedy. I don't see any other way out at the moment, but I want a way out. And I don't, again, we are not occupying the land.
Right.
That's my land. And if I give it up, I'm giving up something. It's an amputation. I'm giving up a limb of the body of the land.
Yossi, have you ever thought about going into politics?
This is about as close as I want to go into it.
Noted.
Conversation
Okay.
we're having right now.
Okay, that's it. Well, you speak like a prophet at times. So it's you have these ideas that I don't know if they fit into the world of politics or not, but that's not for me to decide. You have another book that is your most recent book. It's called Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, and I think that when I think of that book, I think of one word. I think of the E word, empathy. And I also wonder when I about after reading your book, I wonder to what extent empathy is something that you have to be either a ridiculously good person to have or a ridiculously naive person to have, or are there times that empathy is an inappropriate value? So that's what I was wondering after reading your book, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on empathy.
So empathy can be all of those dangers that you just laid out
Okay.
if you don't stand strongly in your place. But when I approach my Palestinian neighbor, as I did in this book, I am approaching my neighbor as an Israeli, a proud, committed Israeli, as a Zionist, as a religious Jew. And I'm telling my neighbor my story, my people's story, why we're here. It's astonishing to me that after 100 years of conflict, no Israeli writer ever turned to our neighbors, the Palestinians, the Arab world generally, and tried to explain who we are. And maybe it's because I'm a religious Jew that it makes sense to me to do that, because I believe that that a fundamental element of religiosity is an acknowledgement of our basic oneness, and and at the same time an assertion within that oneness of our particularity. That for me is the definition of Judaism. We are a particularist faith with a universal goal, which is messianic. And so if you stand in your place strongly, firmly, then you can reach out, then you can show empathy. When I hear anti-Zionist Jews completely identifying with the Palestinian narrative, exchanging their people's narrative for the Palestinian narrative, that's not empathy. Because if you can't have empathy with your own story, with your own people's narrative, then you are incapable of having empathy with anyone else.
So what is that? What is that called then?
Betrayal, surrender. And so, this book, this Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, has its antecedents in Like Dreamers, because Like Dreamers is based on that same principle of empathy, an attempt to understand the left and the right on their own terms. And so the book really is the account of the left and the right in the same narrative. And and that was a very deliberate decision, Noam, because we have left-wing books, we have right-wing books. Like Dreamers is a left-right book. And Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, especially in the new edition, where I publish an epilogue of Palestinian responses to the book. Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor is now an Israeli/Palestinian narrative. And it's the only book that I know like that. And I felt that I was able to give space to the Palestinian voice because these were people who were reading my story and responding to my story. And this idea of empathy isn't only altruistic. It also has a very practical and utilitarian goal. And that is, I want Palestinians, I want the Arab world to hear the Zionist story. And I believe that one of the main reasons why we don't have peace is because the Arab world has rejected the Jewish story, our narrative, our right to be here for the last 100 years. And so if I want my story to be heard by my neighbors, I have to be willing to hear their story. Now, again, it has its idealistic component. It even has, I would say, its spiritual component. But it also has a very practical goal. And that is, I need you, after 100 years of rejecting the Jewish story, I need you to hear who I am and why we came back here, why we're neighbors, why we live here.
Has anybody considered, is there somebody who's going to be writing letters to my Israeli neighbor?
Well, look, in effect, the letters that I received in return from Palestinians are exactly that. I call the new epilogue in the book, and that's in the paperback edition. The hardcover edition does not have those letters. The epilogue is called Letters from Palestinians to Their Israeli Neighbor. And, when I wrote the book and I just put it out there, the book was translated into Arabic and put online for free downloading in Arabic. I have a website in Arabic, and I didn't know what I would get back in return. And it was extraordinary for me to see the hundreds of responses that I've been receiving, continue to receive, not only from Palestinians, throughout the Muslim world, throughout the Arab world. Parts of the Arab media have reviewed the book. Saudi Arabia's leading news weekly, Al Majalla, gave Letters a 2-page, very positive review. Wow. So, you put something out, and this really is coming from my religious belief, if you put something out with goodwill, with the right intentions, you will get back a responses that you couldn't imagine you would ever receive.
Right. Listen, I always, one of the things that I'm wondering is who is the Palestinian Yossi Klein HaLevi? I don't know if you have an answer to that question, but I want to jump into hot takes, a different section. It's a lightning round, so I want to hear your hot takes on certain things, Yossi. Maybe that could be one of them. Who is the Palestinian Yossi Klein HaLevi?
Oh, I could give you names of half a dozen people who wrote letters in the book, and so I would definitely turn there.
Okay, so we encourage all of our viewers to check that out. Next hot take: the answer to peace in Israel is, what's the answer?
The mutual recognition of the legitimacy of each side's maximalist claims to the entirety of the land. All of this land is the land of Israel. All of this land is the land of Palestine. And the tragedy for both sides is we're going to need to partition our identity and our commitment to justice.
Yossi, your favorite Israeli music is?
Israeli rock and roll, especially the religious turn in Israeli music. The meeting of piyut, which is the prayer poetry of the Jews of Arab countries, with avant-garde Israeli rock.
What's your favorite food in Israel?
Hummus ben Sira in Jerusalem.
Oh, I know that well. Okay. I'm going to ask one more thing of you. Can you please share? We have a photograph actually that has significance to you. Can you talk to us about the photo that's on the screen right now?
Well, this is kind of a bar mitzvah photograph of me. It is my first arrest at age 17 in 1971. I remember the exact date, March 21st, 1971. 1,000 young Jews were arrested that day in the streets of Washington. We sat down, blocked traffic, to protest for Soviet Jewry. And it was certainly my coming of age as an activist. And it was the coming of age of my generation and its commitment to the Jewish people.
Yossi, thank you for sharing that with us. We do have two questions from our audience. Question number one is from Eula Girls High School in Los Angeles, just down the road from me. One of their questions is, what are some of the misconceptions young Muslim American leaders have about Jews in Israel when they enter your program? And how do you try to shift their perceptions?
So the biggest misconception is to see Judaism as being similar to Islam and Christianity in the sense that we're only a religion. And the first principle that I try to explain to our students is that Judaism works a little bit differently. We are a people with a religious identity. For that reason, you can be an atheist and still be a Jew, which is not possible in Islam and Christianity. And that has all kinds of repercussions in terms of understanding how a religion can have a nation, can have a land, because we are a people with a religion, with a land, with national sovereignty.
Thank you. And the next question I have, or the last question from the students in Hebrew Academy of Montreal. What impact do you think or hope this pandemic, COVID-19, could have on relations between Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, I think that let me answer the question a little more broadly and then try to apply it specifically. I think that humanity is going to be coming out of this experience with, on the one hand, a reinforced appreciation for the necessity of national borders, because the first impulse of every country was to shut its borders. Even in supposedly post-national Western Europe, the borders were shut against each other. And so we've all experienced the protective necessity of national borders and by extension, national identity. On the other hand, this is the most universal experience that humanity has ever had. Thanks to social media, we are all experiencing the same emotional trajectory simultaneously.
Mm.
And so, where I would hope this would translate into the Palestinian-Israeli realm is, on the one hand, a renewed appreciation for the fact that each side needs to have its separate national existence. And on the other hand, a new appreciation of our commonality, our human commonality, and our commonality as neighbors.
Well, Yossi, thank you so much. I'd love for you to take another 30 seconds, speaking of commonality, to just speak to us for another 30 seconds about Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor and that book.
So, what I'm hoping to do in that book is model a way in which we can begin to speak about our deepest differences, even irreconcilable differences, through mutual respect. And mutual respect does not mean mutual agreement. This is an art that we are losing at our peril. We need to begin to heal our societies, and we need to begin to heal ourselves. And the way in which we heal ourselves is by growing, by becoming multidimensional Jews, multidimensional human beings, and avoiding the pitfalls, the temptations of one-dimensional.
Yossi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all who joined this episode of Game Changers. And be sure to check out our other episodes of Game Changers on our YouTube channel right here. Don't forget to follow us on social media, unpacked.media on Instagram and Unpacked Media on Twitter. And if you liked what we are doing, consider hitting that like button and sharing this with your friends. See you next time.
Thank you, Noam.